Welcome to this next episode of the Beyond Listening podcast. Beyond Listening podcast is brought to you by Open Circle. It's for leaders and change makers who are in the world trying to listen to what's going on for themselves and around them, who are wanting to adapt to what is happening in their world and align themselves to their purpose. Today's episode is myself, Miriam Jones, and Adam Rumack. We're co-founders of Open Circle, and we'll be geeking out on guiding change, something we could probably talk about for hours. We did cut it back to 1 hour for this episode, and we're going through the ins and outs of working with organizations, with groups, with individuals in their change process. Look to the show notes. You'll see there an accompanying article that Adam wrote. And there's also some information about a training that we're having at the end of October in California for people who want to come and learn our approach and our methodology and go deeper into their own journey as a guide of change. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to the Beyond Listening podcast.
Hello.
We are going to talk today about change. And we'll start out by saying, everybody understands, I think, that change is a part of life. It's an ongoing and constant thing, right? Change and taxes are the only thing that's constant in life. We might not think about ourselves as change leaders or change managers or change experts, but we are learning constantly. And I'm talking about, when I say learning, I'm talking about me and Miriam, and we think everybody that's listening to this podcast is learning how to deal with, how to cope with, how to make the most out of change as it presents itself in our life. So whether we're thinking about ourselves as, whether we're thinking about change as a process that we are experiencing individually, or we're thinking about collective change from the smallest level, to people in relationship, to large organizations, to nations, and even, maybe even the human species. Certainly there's a story of change there. We have a lot to learn in our lifetimes and as groups or organizations about how to make the most out of change. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
There's an extra word in the title, which is guiding change. And I think the reason I want to underline guiding is because of, I guess, my relationship with change, particularly as a leader and as someone who has both led organizations and also led a lot of groups through and organizations through change processes. And I think one of the main growing points in my career has been the difference between pushing change, trying to make change happen, and what we're here to talk about today, which is guiding change.
And that's why Miriam and I are actually a good team on this, because I avoid change. I could look at every time I've changed something in my life that's been significant, and my reactions to it are fear, avoidance, wanting to go back. What did I do? I lose a pen and I feel like my life has changed and might be at the beginning of falling apart. So Miriam's pushing change. I'm trying to avoid it. If you're listening to this, you probably have your own, hopefully you have a sense of how you interact with change, that a pattern. What we're interested in is learning how to shift that pattern. You might also be thinking about your groups or your organization, and maybe you're one of the few organizations that easily adapts to change, or you are a facilitator, and every group that you have, everyone's just ready for anything, and they're willing to change, and they're there for that. But more than likely, you're encountering people in your organization or in your groups that are challenged by change, and it's more complex when we're thinking about groups, because everybody's got their own individual reactions and responses, and then an ecosystem, which is composed of all the organisms of individuals that are in that organization, also have a sort of cultural momentum that that has patterns and cycles and ways of responding as well. So if you lead people, or if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably already thinking about change. Most importantly, you have some awareness of your own responses or reactions to that. We're going to say today that it's changeable. And the most important thing to do at the beginning is to learn how you respond and how you react, or how your organization reacts or responds.
And we're coming at this, both Adam and I have been working in transition, both individual and group transitions and change for our whole careers. And at Open Circle, we particularly over the last 10 years have worked with such a breadth of different sorts of organizations, groups, networks, and also on an individual basis, people going through changes in their lives. And I think one of the things we've noticed as guides, and as we have got more nuanced in what I would describe as the art of change, the art of guiding change, we have noticed particular things that are useful in that process. Particular things that really help people transition in a way that is leading towards the outcomes that they want.
Yeah, and the advice on change goes back a long ways. So when I'm as we start to get into thinking about the nuances there of change, at least 2,000, 6,000 year old um, texts about change. And I think my personal unscientific, unscholarly opinion is that every religion or every spiritual practice or path is about helping humans deal with change. And the big change, like we like to think about, if you're a project planner or you think like us, you start with a goal and you work your way back. Well, the ultimate goal is that we are alive right now and we're going to be dead one day. And so that big change is a part of being alive. And humans are coping with that. We're dealing with that. We're trying to figure out spending our lives consciously or unconsciously faced with this imminent change in our realities. So when we look back to, I like to think the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are a compilation of spiritual wisdom, or aspects of it are. And the whole first book of that is about attachment to the way things are. So how do we sort of untangle ourselves from our attachment to the way that things are? All the little things which we might respond to as if it were a life or death situation, right? So I'm thinking back, Miriam, about to pretty much most or half of our coaching clients or organizational clients, they approach their problems in their organization or in their life, like the challenges, as if it were a life or death situation, right? Like if I don't get my way, it's such a big deal that it feels like a little death. Or if I don't achieve what I want to in my career with my business or whatever, it will feel like a failure. And that failure, is sort of is a major loss. And we look at it objectively because we're not in these organizations ourselves. We look at it and it's like, yeah, okay, well, it doesn't seem that bad from the outside. What's that all about? Well, those wisdom texts and wisdom traditions will say, well, yeah, our psyche, our mind is equating losing the pencil with losing our life to some degree. And I know this is a little bit of a exaggeration, but I'm sure that everybody listening to this can look around and think of someone or some group that is infatuated with something. Either usually it's keeping something the same as if it were like going to be the downfall of either their life or Western civilization. Or we can just look at the headlines right now, and it's like, you vote for this candidate, it's the end of democracy. You vote for that candidate, it's the end of democracy. So this sort of exaggerated fear of change, the wisdom traditions would say, is connected to our fear of dying. And then those texts, they all have a different way of approaching change. Well, how do you deal with change? You give yourself up to a higher power. You give yourself over to a practice, meditation, whatever it is, because what I'm trying to emphasize here is, as long as we've been humans writing things down and walking each other through life, we've been having a conversation about change.
I think, Adam, as you're talking, I just went to Yosemite for a few days, and I was a little bit burnt out and stressed. And it was only by the third day that I really had perspective. I was on my own. I was just out backpacking on my own. And I wasn't looking for perspective, but it was only after, I would say, it was like sorting the wheat through the chaff, that I actually could see things as they are. And I think that's also, there's a lot of work also in Western science, both in the organizational world and in the psychology world, about resistance to change. And in the wisdom traditions, attachment in the scientific world, a lot of looking at the patterns, whether it's nervous system patterns or whether it's small t or capital T trauma, or whether it's or looking at personality or also cultural kind of types. And all of those patterns, even in the many years I know and have studied all those patterns, don't stop me being blind to my resistances and my attachments. And so I think one of the things we want to talk about today is, what is it that gets you to a place that allows you to see clearly the change that is happening, and also the resistances that are there in yourself and in the people that you are guiding, or the people around you.
Yeah. Miriam, you're talking about not seeing clearly and getting perspective. One little anecdotal thing I want to share is, I think every single group, and ironically, I think it's every single group that we've successfully navigated through change, at some point during the process, someone has come up to us and said, like, off to the side, like, "Oh, I'm sorry you have to work with such a difficult group. This must be the most difficult group you've ever worked with." Right. And like, I don't know what that says, but one thing is perspective. So what it shows me is something about perspective. So being in it, it can feel incredibly difficult. And for us, we're like, yeah, this is what groups go through when they're going through change. What I think is really important there is that it's when we're afraid of change, is because we don't see something clearly, and we're attached to, and because we don't see something clearly, we're attached to the status quo. And then there's like things that we want and things that we want to avoid because we don't want things to change. And so when you're talking about perspective, is when we can step out of, let's say, the cultural ego. So that might be the ego of our organization. Like I remember taking a vacation, and I'm saying this because I think it's not the only time, even what you're saying, Miriam, like everything seems so important and so heavy and so, not impossible, but I had to be a part of everything in this organization that I was leading. And I took a few weeks away one time. It was my first vacation. And during that time I was like, actually, that stuff's not that important. So in the ego, like, of the culture of that organization, everything was really important and I was in it. And once I stepped out, I could see more clearly that there was a bigger something at play. And what's that thing at play? It's change. It's, hey, this organization exists now and it's not going to exist later. I exist now. I'm not going to exist later. This big problem that the organization is facing today is probably going to be forgotten for another big problem in about a year, or 1 week or 3 weeks, depending on how dramatic the organization is. And so it's this perspective taking, like, one, to remember that change is constant and that we are part of change. Like, that's why the change management thing is so ridiculous, because you can't really manage it, but you can guide it. You can guide people through the process to make it easier, facilitate it to make it easier to cope with, to deal with, and maybe not just cope with, but to get the most out of that opportunity.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking both at an organizational level, but I'm actually thinking more at an individual level as well. How ironic it can seem, because you can say, no, I do want that change. And then you'll go, well, and I say this to myself, why are you acting like that? Because that's exactly the opposite to the change you want. Happens in organizations too. We want to be like this. Well, then why are you doing these things? So I think that's often when you're in it, you can't see or be able to separate out the things that you are doing. We have this enormous privilege that the people that we work with, more often than not, want to stick with us and give us a lot of stories afterwards about how their lives and how their organizations are progressing. And I can think of many examples, and I remember this because I videotaped a couple where they would say, well, when we first started working with you, I realized now we weren't asking the right questions. And I think that's one of the main things that happens in that kind of process of blindness, is that you're kind of like zeroed in on something that you think is the change. And that when you get that perspective, actually the whole question changes itself. And this experience that people have had working with us, and I'm sure many others when they're guiding change, of this experience when they're in it. Adam was talking about the sidestep, we must be so difficult to work with. We also get this sidestep of like, what's going on? Is this magical or something? But everything seems to be flowing now or synchronous. So this movement from everything feeling stuck and like, to this feeling like, oh, everything is working in time again. And this movement of change really being about balance and alignment rather than this, it's kind of this sort of pushing, as I was talking about, like my first half of my life, of like setting a goal and like pushing towards it no matter what anything or anyone else says.
So I think, this is a fundamental thing to remember. There's people that would rather go back to some fictional past, like when America was great, or would rather, want things to stay exactly the same, whether it's in an organization. A lot of people, because change is hard, want things to stay the way they are. So fundamentally, we're suggesting that we can personally and then create a culture, help to create a culture where change is not only accepted but embraced. We might not all agree on the type of change we want to see, and that's fair enough. But even in the going back, we're suggesting that change is possible. Even if to maintain the status quo, we're going to have to change some things if the momentum is going in another direction. And when we think about change, we're thinking about, and there's an article that's going to come along with this podcast about the type of change, which means that something has to die. So change can be, I'm going to change where I eat dinner tonight. Yeah, we always go to pizza. Let's go get like Thai food, right? And yeah, there's a change, but it's superficial. We're staying on a certain level. So we're calling this horizontal. We've been calling this horizontal change. And likewise, take it a little bit more to organizational change or even group facilitation. I think it's totally cool to do, and I want to do more of this, just a backpacking trip with people that want to go see a new place, right? There's a lot that can be gained from that. And there probably is some deeper change that can happen there, but it could also be a vacation, right? So it's, well, I always see this week. I'm usually in an office, so I'm going to go be the same person in a different place. And that's a change of scenery, but it's not the kind of change that we're talking about. An organization can, let's institute casual Fridays, or let's, even doing things, adding mental health resources, or the DEI initiatives that happened during COVID. Those were all, in my mind, they were all horizontal. So they're all surface changes. And in fact, to me, they're still about avoiding fundamental change, right? If we're hoping for something different, like if we go on the vacation to find ourselves, then we're probably going to be let down unless we're understanding that we're actually going out on that vacation to let something die. Most of us aren't, or going on this the organizational retreat to let something die.
For whatever reason, a lot we do some. It's necessary to do some horizontal change. We do some of it, but the crux of our work is this second type of change, which Adam is talking about. And I think the crux of it is because it is a lot harder.
Yeah. You shouldn't be in a leadership role, in a high level leadership role in an organization, you shouldn't be facilitating like so-called transformational experiences if you're not invested in the other type of change, which we're going to talk about. If you're purely administrative, right, as an executive level, then your title doesn't match what you're doing, right? If you're facilitating groups so that people just go and have a good experience and a vacation from their daily lives, you're not a facilitator, you're a tour guide, right? So it's not just that we believe in this, it's that we want to make a distinction between that horizontal, what we're calling horizontal, and vertical. It's my belief that like anyone in a high level leadership role is a change leader, right? Because otherwise it's just, you're there to maintain the status quo. You're more of an administrator. So you're helping, in a sense, you're hospicing on a constant basis. You're hospicing things the way things were, and you're midwifing what's coming. And sometimes that's planned, like in an organizational transformation. And sometimes it's just what happens, like a big social or cultural or technological transformation happens. And there are aspects of that which are technical, and there are aspects of that which, and most people can just, it's easy to find people that can handle the technical part. But when you're leading the transformation of thinking or relating or seeing of identity of the organization or of a person, then you're actually, I think, in that leadership role.
And I want to also just put in here that I think one of the things that we see a lot of is misdiagnosis, seeing or people feeling that a change is happening either individually or in a group, and kind of misdiagnosing it as a horizontal change because it feels safer, but it's false. And I think similarly, I'm thinking about our life, this being able to recognize, for example, when we're going into another phase of our life and being able to go along with it. And I think every individual, you wouldn't be human if you didn't see in your life when you actually did move phases and you were either with it or you were like, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to be in that phase of my life. Or you might be ahead of it. You want to go, I don't want to be in here. I want to actually be here. And so a lot of this is actually really being able to recognize what sort of change process you're in terms of the outcomes that you want, either as an individual in your life or as an organization, what sort of vertical change that means you need to make to be in step with that outcome that you're creating in your life or in your organization.
We would expect that people would want to avoid vertical if at all possible. We could use the COVID example where, everyone treated a major shift in social relationships as if it were a technical problem to be solved. Hey, we're all on Zoom now and we're just going to keep going the same way. And I think looking back, go back to our other podcast, we talk about like what the hell just happened. We haven't had time to reflect on the bigger social transformation that happened. But I was thinking even just a couple of weeks ago, I had what turned out to be a very minor health thing, but it was this. But I went to the doctor and the doctor was like, well, let's we're going to rule out anything really bad first. And of course, that's not a fun thing to hear. And I was like thinking to myself, man, I hope I'm just like low on iron, because if that's not it, then it's going to be a vertical transformation, whether I'm really sick or whether it's something, life threatening. Why would we not, if we just think about this as something is going to die and our reaction to it is that, then we would do anything we could to not do that. So in organizations, same thing. Let's talk about vertical change real quick. So vertical change often involves a fundamental rethinking of things like our values, our purpose, how we see ourselves, like our sense of self-identity, how others might see us, and I've been thinking about it as like an up and down vertical. We could use the word evolution because from a developmental theory perspective, we are going up, which means we're including where we are now and we're going above that. So we're now have a broader perspective. But I think from a spiritual perspective, we're also going in and down. So vertical, like horizontal is like going around in circles and we're just changing the scenery, but nothing fundamentally is changing. Vertical is we see more interdependency. We understand more the impact that we're having or that other people are having on us. We see more of the ecosystem in which we're involved. So it goes from, oh, this is just me in my office, or this is just me in my organization, or this is our organization is part of a much broader system of give and take and reciprocity or impact, like positive, negative, neutral impact. So that's the up. And the down is getting a deeper understanding and mastery of whatever it is that we're doing, right? And also of the complexity, like the not organized, categorized, simple complexity, but messy complexity. So I'll give an example of what I'm talking about with that with both of those. So upward, I think I gave a good example. Siloed off, our organization's working in this bubble, and our number one, if we're making profit, we're good, right? And so the evolution there might be, or the upward vertical might be, oh, wait a minute, we might be part of this bigger story of human impact on planet Earth that might include, okay, well, our profit, our, let's say, production of lithium ion batteries is going to create these problems over in the Middle East where extraction of those, or North Africa where extraction of those lithium ion batteries or lithium is happening. And so the individuals in that organization might have a vertical transformation where they start to see, oh, wait, me sitting at my computer and doing programming for the computer system of the hybrid car is also connected to the impact happening over there in North Africa. I'm not even getting political here, but whatever choice that person makes, it's starting to see that bigger picture. They might start to also see that their own values don't match with that, and they feel trapped because of that or whatever. And then change happens from the inside out. Vertically downward, I'm thinking on the level of a deeper understanding of whatever it is that we're doing. So in the beginning of a career, we might see from the surface level, it's a job that we get paid for, that we get status for, that we get surface level. A vertical transformation going down in this way that I'm thinking about it would be starting to gain mastery over the tools, and also understanding that starting to see that the trajectory of our work, of our expression of life through our work is not a linear path, right? I'm going to give a concrete example from entrepreneurship. 7 out of 10 businesses fail, right? New businesses every year. Maybe it's 8 out of 10. And I like to think about how many times those 2 or 3 would have failed if they didn't keep going, the ones that survived. And I think that the vertical transformation downward is to recognize that the idea of starting the business is not the same as the reality of it, and starting to accept that and be able to let that idea die so that we can keep living. And in the beginning, we might have identified with a certain idea of success, with a certain idea of our ability to achieve whatever we set out to do, a certain idea of how much money we're going to make, a certain idea of what the company is going to look like, whatever. And the vertical transformation downward might be an acceptance of its messiness, of a number of failures that happen, of the numbers of complicated, complex relationships that get entered into and then exited from along the way. So those are the types of verticals.
What does all of that mean for someone who is guiding change? And essentially, it means that you're guiding people into the unknown, into the deeply unknown, not just a change of scenery, but into a whole new territory where everything appears different. And you're also guiding people into what's essential, sort of a stripping away of patterns and of ways of behaving and ways of interacting into actually getting, that's the vertical in terms of guiding into new territory, the unknown, and guiding into what's essential. and what's going to not change actually, and what is actually, when we talk about essentials, what you actually are taking with you into that unknown territory. And so those two things, when you're guiding change, are the two things that you are looking at, and with the group and or with the individual.
So we're recognizing what kind of change it is that we're actually looking for, right? If it's technical, then, they're probably on the wrong retreat or they've hired the wrong company, right? And there certainly is technical changes. As you go deeper into, let's say, that example of entrepreneurship and the downward vertical, there's skills and tools that are picked up along the way, right? But they're easy. ChatGPT has 90% of that handled now. How do I make an Excel spreadsheet to forecast sales? Okay, 3 seconds, and now it takes 5 minutes to actually do it, right? So it's not human, right? It's technical. The human side of things is challenging because, and this is going to lead us into like some things to consider, or some things to help shape how you're guiding change. So the human side of things, we are complex organisms that are part of very complex ecosystems of many other interdependent organisms, from the human to the non-human, and not even non-animal, right? So like the air we breathe, all the elemental aspects. But as humans, we have the false separation between things, but they're useful. The false separations are useful when we're thinking about how we are responding to change. So biologically, when we're faced with significant change, and we can backtrack from life or death to losing of a pencil on a spectrum in there, our bodies and our minds, our brains, react with stress. We have a stress response, like an increase in cortisol, a decrease in testosterone, male or female, right? So these stress responses are happening when we think that we're going to lose something. And this is something like we're not even conscious of. The evolutionary psychology and biology says, okay, that started back when we were really faced with life or death situations every day, which would have been the case for our ancestors. And we would do anything we could. If we are faced with life or death, we would do anything we could to not die, which means either fighting and killing, whatever the threat is, or retreating, fight or flight. Maybe we're also gathering and keeping our unit of other humans safe. So our bodies are responding in that way. Our mind is also constantly seeking out danger, as if those dangers were life or death. So we're infatuated as humans with keeping what we have and not losing anything. And so there's an economic saying that says losses loom larger than gains. I think it comes from the stock market, maybe. So, about risk taking, but it's true of our human psychology as well. So what we present to our thinking, than what we stand to gain, because losing something from an ancestral perspective, from our past, our evolutionary past, means that we have to go find it again or get something else, which means putting ourselves at risk calorically or physically, just going out into the landscape and getting, let's say we have a cache of meat, we lose that meat, now we have to go put ourselves at risk to find more food, and we may die, right? So those of our ancestors that survived to pass on their genes, the story goes anyways, would have avoided losing anything at any cost, rather than try to go find something. Like I've got this elk over here, but I think there's a bigger elk over there. I'm going to go find that. But that's not something we would have done. We would have done what we could to protect what we have. So the people that we're working with are doing the same thing. It's just that now it's their ideas, it's their jobs, it's their project, it's their whatever they've accumulated in their lives that they're worried about losing. And so to we have to make the potential gain tangible enough that they'll leave the metaphorical elk meat to go find the berry patch or whatever it is, right? Or vice versa. Leave the berry patch to go find the elk would probably be more convincing. And so we have to show people in this world of abstraction, where it's very hard. There's so many distractions, that the current experience that they're having is not the only experience that they could have, and there might be something better out there. On the sociological level, we live in a society where status is very much determined by what we have. So that could be our position within an organization, the amount of money we make, and we tend to identify with those things. Oftentimes, these changes mean changing our identity. Whether our status in that is in a little pond or a big pond, it can feel very scary to lose that status, which is why I think every single group we work with, there's like you come in and there's a day, or on a more difficult program, it's a couple days, where everybody's kind of operating from that status perspective. Like, I'm going to show you who I think you think I should be, so that I can find my place in this group. Right. And again, they're, part of what we see in groups, and you would see this in your own organizations or groups, is this sort of playing the roles and not being able to almost dissociate the role from the change itself, from the potential that's going to happen. Again, it's that loss. It's the what's at stake here is a sense of belonging and understanding who we are within the social context.
And as you're talking, it's just coming to me again and again of why this is so important. This is important because what you see, and statistics back this up currently, is when the change doesn't happen, what you're seeing is an adverse effect. So that stress, which can be healthy, the stress of change creates actually the biological ability to move forward, to change. But when you get stuck and when that resistance looms larger than the ability to change, what you are starting to see is anxiety, depression, lack of purpose and meaning. And when you look at the building stats, and we'll put some research notes below, and also a loss of connectivity. So people will start to report that they feel isolated, they feel lonely, their anxiety is building, they're feeling depressed, or they don't feel any sense of I'm living a life of purpose. When we see that happen, often in groups or in organizations, what we start to see is a horizontal, when we're talking about those levels, horizontal solutions. Go for a vacation, take time off. And again, none of those are bad, but more often than not, underneath that is this resistance to change that's happening. The lack of capacity to move forward, to use the stress to move forward because of that fear of the unknown, because of the misdiagnosis, as we said before, of the situation. And so that's what we're observing, and that often is what leads to more of that circular motion. So anxiety is rising, depression's happening, burnout is a common term that's used, and then these kind of band-aids are put on them, but it's not solving the problem. And in fact, the problem's going up. And then we're seeing retention rates rising, people are moving around situationally, and a lot of what we are suggesting in this time of being able to face the unknown is pausing, either an operational pause or an individual pause, to be able to get this perspective of being able to sort through what is the change that's actually happening, what is, again, as we said, what's essential, and being able to, again, move with what's actually going on in the phase the organization or the person is in their life.
Yeah, and I think you meant retention rates were going down.
Down. Thank you. Retention.
Um,
Retention.
Turnover is going up.
Turnover is going
I
up.
think they're really.
Down. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think for an organization itself too, the pause is the fundamentals of both of those pauses in considering the change. And I don't think it's even like we're going to take that pause because we think things might need. I think it's just a pause and reflection. And the pause and reflection is, are we doing what we're here to do? And that's individual or collective, right? I think that's an important question. I think it's a question that we ask individually on our programs without explicitly asking for it. So we do the fast. And I think when we sit with ourselves alone with a broader perspective of wilderness, without a lot of the distractions, I think what comes up for a lot of people is, am I good in my relationships? Am I doing what I'm here to do on earth? Why? Because I think that we're bringing the death question closer. We're reducing the psychological distance between the present and what can seem like a far off change, which is death, right? Just the aloneness and the not eating food and feeling like we're not on the top of the food chain, although usually they are, anyways. But psychologically, those big questions sort of naturally rise. I think for organizations is the same thing. If an organization, nonprofit or for profit, is not asking the question of, are we actually achieving our mission on a regular basis? How can we improve in the achievement of our mission? Then they're on the path to irrelevancy or just bureaucratic stagnation. I think those two things go the same. So are we an organization that's just maintaining the status quo, or an organization of administrators? Nothing against administrators, by the way, but we're talking to leaders, I think, or we're speaking to the leadership capability of everybody in an organization. Are we just maintaining our roles and our identities? Are we just keeping our jobs? Are we keeping the organization because alive because it has a legacy? Are we maintaining we want to make sure we keep the same level of status in the organization? Or are we actually achieving the mission that we set out to? I'm curious about how we can better, and how anyone listening to this can better shorten the psychological distance between those big existential questions for organizations and those operational or organizational pauses. Because oftentimes for us, it takes a long time of building trust with the organization, of making small vertical changes before we get to the point where, wait a minute, we're starting to see, as we loosen the binds of attachment to the way things are, that maybe we should make a bigger change because we're actually not achieving our mission in the way that we think we really could be or should be or need to be now. Maybe 20 years ago we were doing it right, but 20 years ago we didn't have iPhones. We didn't have all the impacts of climate change. We didn't have such a dramatically divided political mindset. We didn't have the social media. So many things have changed that there's no way that what worked 20 years ago is going to be working today.
Yeah, and I want to jump to why we are so adamantly inviting people into natural and wilderness environments to do this work. I think when Adam and I talk about it, it's because it makes our work so much easier. And there's a reason for that. When you're in a natural or wilderness environment in a particular way, where you're really able to observe it, to listen to it, and both individually and as groups, it's really hard. I would say impossible. I've never seen this in anyone we've taken out into natural settings, wilderness settings, to not notice the interdependence of life and death and the interdependence of things in the ecosystem, and to feel yourself as a part of that. And I think so it is the perspective shift of being able to stop and look at what is going on with some separation. But there's something that particularly happens in natural and wilderness settings, where you can acknowledge the just in simply seeing a day, the sunrise, seeing the sunrise clearly, seeing the seeing midday, seeing it set, that you can start to get in touch with the cycle of things. And that's really what you're doing for yourself and for your organization, is listening to the cycles in the organization, what cycle you're in, instead of really in the doing of it. And the same with your life, looking at, oh, what cycle am I in my life, that broader perspective, instead of in the, very busy doingness of it every day. And so nature, this is a cliche, but nature is truly a teacher, and it speaks in exactly the right way to the organization, to the group, to the individual, in terms of the cycle that they're in, because people tend to and do notice in the environment around them in that setting, away from technology and their phones and their day-to-day busyness. They notice what they need to see about where they're at in their cycle. And it inevitably happens in all of the programs we do, in everyone we take out into those settings. And that work of being able to see what cycle you're in and see where you're stuck can take so much longer when you're caught up in the busyness of your life. And so that's one of the reasons why we really encourage that as a tool, and use it as a tool in combination with being able to stop, to listen to each other, to listen to the world as it is, being able to listen to yourself, that depth that Adam was talking about, and come back into your life with that clarity.
Yeah, and I think it's all of that, and additionally, I think it's about vulnerability. We talk about, fortunately, it's waned a little bit in the popular culture, but vulnerability, can seem like this. Oh, you just be vulnerable, be more of yourself or whatever. But I like to, and I've for a long time thought about vulnerability as being exposed. We're exposing ourselves, and so everything that the line that I've been following here is like, that sounds like a really bad idea from a survival perspective, right? Sociologically, it's dangerous. Physically, it would seem dangerous. And like wilderness or nature exposes us on its own. So we don't get to choose, is it going to be a rainy day or is it going to be a nice like degrees, or 60 degrees is great when we're hiking. We don't get to choose, is the ground comfortable or not that we're sleeping on. We are vulnerable to the broader environment that we're a part of. And I think that what people learn, one of the things that people learn is that it's okay, actually. Not only is our whole survival system in the group, it's the other people that we're with. This is not actually true. I mean, to some degree it's true, but I think psychologically it feels this way. Our survival system is our group. It's only what we have in our backpack, and it's the reasoning that we have in our brain, in our minds, and maybe some kind of spiritual connection that we have. And what I think that does is it helps us loosen our attachment to, well, if I don't have it exactly this way, like it's not just 70 degrees and perfectly comfortable, and I'm in my like house or office or whatever, if I don't get a shower every day, if I don't get my favorite food every day, if I don't like work out or not work out in the exact way that I want to, everything's going to fall apart. And I think after like a couple of days of realizing, like, actually, no, with this group of people, we can do this. We can climb up the mountain with what we have in our backpacks, with the mediocre food that we have, with the plans that never work out exactly the way we think they were. Hey, look, we're all okay. And not only are we okay, but we're, for some reason, without those comforts, we feel better. And then, so when we take that back to home, whether that's the office or our relationships at home or whatever, we can take that perspective of like, nothing is exactly the way I want it to be. But it's okay. I'm still okay. And I'm also okay with a little bit more okay because of that, with whatever fear I have about change, of the unknown, of whatever it is that we are facing. Because actually change most of the change that we face every day is not death. It's very minor. It's more like the losing of the pencil than it is like losing everything. And so I think it creates that perspective too, that like I didn't have that pencil for 5 days and I was fine. I also didn't have a bathroom. I also didn't take a shower. I also didn't like, eat anything that wasn't dehydrated, and I'm still okay. And not only am I okay, but I'm better. I saw that giving up what I had for something else was actually better than holding on to everything that I had and avoiding what I got.
So, Adam, you're talking about my control issues, aren't you?
Um, no,
I
I'm not always talking about your control
I
issues.
I feel like you were giving a sermon. And seriously, that, everything that Adam was saying is also about you as a guide of change. One of the things we do when we work with people who are guiding change is we have to start with, for example, your own relationship with change, your own biases, your own control issues, as I just brought up, because they will be highlighted as you are guiding a group, whether it's facilitating a group, whether it's an expedition leader, whether it's an organizational leader. Any of your biases and assumptions, any of your resistances to change, all of your control issues, I'm talking about myself here, it's not that you can get rid of them, but they will be there as a leader when you are guiding the group through change, and they can actually inadvertently redirect the group towards the resistance rather than actually be able to, as much as possible, give space to the change that's already happening for them or for the group. And I think as a person who guides change, and I would say for both of us that have come to some mastery, I think that's been actually the mastery of being simpler and doing less, and the capacity to do less, except in moments where it's really important to do something. So, a lot of what we're doing when we're working with people who are guiding change and training them is looking, firstly, there is skills, there's methods that we use, there's techniques, but really the primary work, and this comes from the feedback people have given us, is looking at their own relationship with change first, and how that impacts how they're planning for the change, how they're strategizing for it with the group, how they're facilitating it, what problems they're moving towards or moving away from. All of those things, their relationship with tension, all of those things are the things that facilitate someone's capacity to be able to make easy, which is facilitate, to be able to guide, to be able to direct when necessary or support when necessarily, and know the difference when they're leading a change process.
I think it would be really hard to lead vertical or transformational, whatever change, with a rigid plan, right? Like another popular thing,
I can
semi
attest to that.
popular in the culture was like emergent strategy. Well, that was like not a new idea when it came out. That's called like being alive, going with the flow. Like the whole movie Big Lebowski, was about this guy who had a really great emergent strategy for life. But I think that that's my experience of guiding change has been, it's the place where I really get to fully accept that my role is to go with the flow and trust that in the going with the flow, I've got what I need to navigate that. And, that the partner, when it's you and me, Miriam, that we got it, like in our relationship and in our individual perspectives. And then that the group has it, like they're going to be okay. If we stick with our plan, if we were just rigidly like forcing our plan and our expectations, what we're signaling, I think, to the group is actually, you don't have it. We've got it. You need us to do this. You need us to navigate change, whatever. And that's the opposite of what needs to be cultivated, I think, could be cultivated in a group when they're navigating individual or collective change, is that actually everything is here already. We're just going to together unearth what's here. Because if you didn't have it before you came on this, whatever, or we came into your organization, then there's really no hope for you. And there's hope for everyone. So that's not what I'm saying. But the opposite would be signaling like, hey, no, you don't got it. You need us. We have the plan. We know where you're supposed to be going. And if you don't know that, then there's something wrong with you. That's the opposite. So it's cultivating this perspective, I think, which we get to, and I'm saying we get to practice it out and live it out there because it's not the day to day. I wonder what's going to happen next. Oh, we've got a 1 inch gash in a foot, and there's bones and blood. There's blood and guts, and okay, we're going to deal with that. And I wonder what's going to happen next. Are we going down the hill, or are we going continuing up the hill, right? Whereas like day to day, I might be like, I wonder if the best thing would be going to the hospital. I wonder, when we are holding that perspective and we get to live that completely, not only does it help our as guides, and if you're a guide on these kinds of things, I think this is an invitation for you too, to let that infuse your daily life, because I guarantee you nobody lives the same way they do on the trail or in the program that they do at home. And the reason I know that is because I really believe that we teach what we most need to learn ourselves. And we are our own worst teacher. So we're guiding because we're the worst students of change. And because we're such bad students, we've had to learn, I'm just speaking about myself right now, Miriam. I've had to learn really well, like, how do I deal with change? What is going on? Why am I reacting this way to change? Why am I so afraid? Why am I trying to backtrack so much? Why am I whatever? And what are some ways that I can overcome that? And when we get to teach it, we also get to learn it even better for ourselves. So what the whole point, I'm just following up on what you're saying, Miriam, is like, it starts with us as the facilitators, as the guides. It starts with you as a leader if you're in an organization, and primarily understanding all the ways that your own stuff is getting in the way of what's happening for the group or not happening for the group.
And I think knowing that there's never an end point for that. I mean, Adam's talking about himself. Of course, he's talking about me too. But as anyone who is guiding change, there is never an end point. It's continually alive and more nuanced in terms of the situation. The situation is alive. We talk about the natural world, but going back into your life, your work, or wherever it is, being able to be in the life in its aliveness and being able to listen to it and adjust and also go within and continue to see where the resistances and the adjustments are, and particularly when we're guiding change, whether it's for individuals or groups or organizations. Another key capacity is being able to, as a guide, Adam talked about being I'm the person who creates the change when the program's too rigid, but it's also having the capacity as a guide to let the group let people learn from each other, and let the group learn together, because there is enormous gifts and synchronicity in that, in creating a space where people can really hear each other's stories, hear each other's wisdom, be able to take it in, be able to also witness what a collective movement is, the skills in that, whether it's on the trail or back in life, being able to really take in people as people, or being able to take in a collective story or movement, are really, really helpful skills in being able to not just adjust individually, as we talked about as a guide, but being able to see movement in general in culture and in groups. There's so much more, Adam, and I think we could talk forever on this, because
I think we should do like a whole 2-part program on
we
this.
could. And part of this is because we do have a guiding change training coming up. We really want to encourage people to come along. It's at the Feather River. It's for
Where's the
facilitators.
Feather River? Where?
Oh, I know it so well. It's my home, Adam. It's my home. It's in the Los
The
Sierras. It's near
world
Tahoe.
famous, infamous Feather River that everybody knows about.
Yeah, it's in California. It's near Lake Tahoe. And we're inviting leaders who are guiding change. As Adam said, all leaders, we believe, are guiding change. We're inviting facilitators, expedition leaders, people who are working with groups, and really do want to be doing this vertical change movement with the people that they're working with. Really, for this first one, it's inviting that exploration of yourself as a guide. Where are your biases? What are you assuming in terms of your approach? If you're like me, where are your control issues? Where are you just hanging on so tight like you don't want to let go? And and the discovery of what's underneath that, the wisdom that's underneath that in terms of what you are guiding other people with, and how you're approaching it.
So the first part's going to be there's an online portion, a lot of like information and some models and a bunch of ideas. And then when we get into person at Feather River, we can use that time for really like experiencing what it is to learn from the group, do a 24-hour solo as part of that, or I think 24 hours, right? We're still going to do 24 hours.
Yeah, we'll 12 to 24. We'll see.
12
We're
to
also
24. It depends on how freezing cold it is at
yeah,
night.
it depends. And also we're doing like a guided hike,
Yeah.
like that, those kind of things.
So it's really the purpose of the in time in person is to be experiential, to be embodied with other people, so that we can learn from each other. And our hope is that, and we do this in all our other programs, is that those experiences can be laboratories for learning and for experimentation that are safer places to learn and experiment than when you're in your leadership role. So this is another tenet of change, finding those places where it's safe enough to try out different things, experience different things, where you're not so tightly held by some of the other systems of thinking or social systems that might be more threatening to change, and experiment with back at home. So
Yeah, and in this particular one, we're asking each person who comes to bring a case study. So what's the area that they're guiding change and the particularities of that. And so doing that self-exploration, but then also applying that back to the situation that you're about to be in or are in terms of where you're guiding and leading, and seeing then how your perspective shifts. Am I actually asking the right questions? Do I need to be asking different questions about this situation in terms of my leadership or my guidance of it? So that's coming up at the end of October, and then we're doing another one next year, really focused on group collective change.
yeah, and that one's so complicated. I don't know how we're gonna pull it off, Miriam, but we will. We will.
You'll see in the show notes some of the research around the modalities that we use. So some of the research around nature and listening circles, open circles, and also around mindfulness, some of those things which we're building your capacity to integrate into what you're doing. And you'll also see some research done on our work. So we've been, if you've been listening to our podcast, we're working with the University of Utah Cognition Lab and seeing some really amazing results, some 20 to 50% jumps in social connectivity, positive affect. So take a look at those, and that's really focused on the work that our nonprofit is doing, working with individuals.
Thanks for listening, and get back to avoiding
Don't go changing.
whatever you were avoiding before you started this, and then think about what you're really after. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
See you next time.